As we begin another panel of the Luso-American Education Foundation Conference, Navigating the Future, the Role of the Portuguese Hall in the 21st Century, we are looking for at least one other participant that had verified that he would be on here, and the possibility of two. If they do join us later, we'll be more than happy, of course, to put them on and start involve them in the conversation. But for now, let us start so we do not start this a bit too late. I know that all of you have busy lives. I see that Tisha's in the car, so she's probably waiting to drive somewhere. And thank you all for joining us. It is indeed a pleasure to have all three of you on. And it is indeed a pleasure to have three women in leading roles in halls because as I mentioned, for far too long, it was a male-dominated field. And, and actually it still is in some halls throughout certain parts of California, as I was reminded a few weeks ago. So the role of the Portuguese Hall in the 21st century is our theme. We have Christina, Tish, and Elaine, and I'm going to ask each and every one of you if you'll be kind enough to give us I always say 5 to 7 minutes, but it's okay if you go 8 or 9. It's not okay if you go 25. I'll probably have to cut you off, but I'm just kidding. But if you can take 5 to 7 minutes, that amount of time to introduce yourself. I know that in the halls that you're involved in that area of the Portuguese American community, you're well known. But we have folks watching us at different time zones, including those in Hawaii that are watching us, and also this is being recorded not just for our Fresno State YouTube PBBI page, but also as part of the oral history collection. So the PBBI, Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at Fresno State, has an ongoing oral history collection, and these talks are going to be will be transcribed and part of our oral history collection because it's who we are, and it's very important that a scholar wanting to learn about the Portuguese American experience in 2022, a scholar maybe in 2085, 60 years from now, can look at this archive and look at how the community was and have firsthand information other than it was passed on from generation to generation. So I'll start with Christina. If you don't mind telling us a little bit about yourself, telling us a little bit about your hall and your Portuguese American collection. And again, a connection, I should say. And again, thank you so much for taking time. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Christina Francisco, born and raised in Santa Clara. My parents are immigrants from the island of Pico in the Azores. And we grew up attending Portuguese festas throughout my childhood. And so I definitely have an affinity for it. I attended San Jose State. I minored in Portuguese studies. And only this past year have I gotten involved in the Mountain View Hall, IFES, at the request of a friend. I'd gotten requests before and never really had the time or energy, or I think even the interest. And then as I get older, and even my daughter has been involved in the hall as a Portuguese queen, I thought, this might be a good way to spend some more time with my parents. And, we had an event last night, and I think attendance is struggling, but, just talking with the attendees, it was we weren't sure how it was going to be received after so months away. And you just see the happiness that the Portuguese just love to come together and share together in meals. And so I'm really happy to be here and represent. And I will pass it on to, I guess, Tisha, or I'm sorry, I should let you do that.
No, that's fine. Tish is great. IFES in Mountain View has such a strong history and a strong presence in the Portuguese American community in the Bay Area. So thank you for taking on that challenge. I know it's hard, and I know that these are trying times as well. Thank you, Christina, and your roots in the beautiful island of Pico, which touched my heart because that's my favorite. I'm not from Pico. I'm from Terceira Island. I can already tell you that, but that's my favorite island in the Azores. Well, my second. My first is Flores, but Pico a very close second. So talking about Pico, there's Tisha Cardozo with some roots there in Pico, if I'm not mistaken. So Tisha, a little bit about yourself, and also tell us a little bit about the Selma Hall.
Yeah, so I'm Tisha Cardoza. I am part of the Selma Hall. I currently run the bar out of the hall, but I have been a president. I was president for 5 years before I gave it up. My grandmother was the first female president at the hall in the late 90s. I was the second, close to 20 years later. I think it was 15 years, if I remember right, exactly 15 years after she was. I also have other involvement. I'm a past grand president for SPRSI. I'm currently chairman of the board for the Brotherhood of St. Anthony. As far as being involved in the Selma Portuguese Hall, obviously I was Little Queen in the 80s. I was Big Queen in 95, 96. Then I went off to college and started doing my own thing. Then in the early 2000s, my grandmother got me to come back for a little bit. And then I'll be honest, there were some things that I didn't necessarily agree with how they were being ran. So I chose to spend my time elsewhere for a bit. I also had to, for work, move to San Mateo for 2 years. But when I came back, Geraldine Thomas sent me reminders every single Sunday night that Monday was going to be the meeting for the hall. And she eventually got me to come back between reminders and using that great Portuguese guilt that your grandma would be so happy if you came back, because grandma passed away in 2012. So I came back in 2013 to the hall, and I've been there ever since. So we're a small community, obviously, in a small hall compared to some, but we're mighty, so to speak. I always was taught quality over quantity. So we hang in there. And Denise, thank you again for allowing me to be part of one of the panels here, and to PPBI for putting this together for all of history.
Thank you.
Keep up
Thank
the
you
good
so
work,
much.
Denise.
Thank you. Thank you, Tisha. Now, she's always has the kind words. But thank you, Tisha. I appreciate it. And we'll talk a little bit about more in detail about what you're doing there as well. Elaine, happy to have you back. I think you were in the panel a couple of years ago when we talked about the halls. At that time, everything was shut down, if you remember. And we had folks from, we had actually a big panel because everybody was just kind of looking for something to do because everything was shut down at this time in 2020. And I recall that you had you participated with lots of good ideas and lots of good questions as well. And we're happy to have you back. So tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about the San Pablo Hall as well.
Yes, my name is Elaine Almeida, and I was born and raised right here in this area, in San Pablo, Richmond area. I'm a little bit different that my father is a mainlander from the Distrito Aveiro, and my mother is Picuense. They are both immigrants, so I am first generation here. My mom's family came at a much earlier time. I don't know necessarily why, but she had family in the valley, in Ripon, Manteca especially. And I know my internet is not working well, so I apologize for this.
It's working fine. It's okay.
Okay, I'm getting little signals here.
No, but we're understanding everything fine, and your image is fine as well.
Okay. In terms of the San Pablo Holy Ghost Association, we are the oldest, or maybe the second oldest. There's been debate about that in the state of California. In fact, years and years and years ago, it was a relative of my mother's who used to cook sopas. In terms of our directors, if you're asking about the women that are involved, we have presently probably 8 women on our board out of, I believe it's 13 or 14. So the women outnumber. And possibly it's because the women do most of the cooking, and so fundraising events are usually decided by who's going to be the chef of the day, and it's usually a woman. We just had our first, well, I shouldn't say that. In April, we did an open house, which was the first time we had people in our hall. But this last Friday, we started up, we used to do Friday night dinners years ago, pre-pandemic. And this last Friday was the first time we had an in-house Friday night dinner. And I must admit, it wasn't a big crowd. People are still, I think, a little bit insecure about safety and not getting exposed or exposing others. But it was an awesome time. People were in such good moods. They obviously, because we don't take reservations at these dinners, so we have to guesstimate how many people might appear. And if you're Portuguese, you're cooking for 100, even though 50 show up. And so people could eat as much as they wanted for the same price. They just had a blast. And it was so exciting to have people in such good humor, camaraderie. It was exceptional. And we look forward to doing our next one, which is at the last Friday of October.
Indeed, thank you so much. And that's kind of a struggle that's been happening at various venues, even at an academic setting. We just had our first in-person event on Thursday, and Tisha knows, as she attended many of our events at Fresno State, we always would have a minimum of 50 to 60 people, and we struggled to have 24, so 25. So it's interesting. And I even mentioned this yesterday. We had a course about the Azores, a course that I'm teaching on the Azores for lifelong learning, and we wanted to bring it back into in person at the university. It's a course for folks who are usually retired that would like to learn about different cultures, and it was we had many requests on a course on the Azores that included history, culture, and food, and so those are things that we all like, and so we went ahead and we did we did this event, and the thing about it was that we only had 7 people signed up for it, and when we turned it from in person to online, it went from 7 to 37. So it's interesting how folks are still a little bit leery about some of the things that are going on. So, Christina, let's talk a little bit about, we'll start with you if you don't mind again. Talk a little bit about, you mentioned about IFES. So the pandemic is over with somehow, everybody says it is over, and it is, and our numbers, of course, show that. But this reluctancy that people have, did you see that? I know the IFES must have had, as everybody, their festa this year, which I don't know what month yours is, but most of them are May, June, July. The festa, how was it in your perspective compared to pre-pandemic times of 2018-19? Your thoughts?
Yeah. Our festa is Memorial Day weekend, so it's always kind of a bit, people want to attend, but they have Memorial Day plans. And so, given, I think, what we've gone through, it is, I think there was a lot of people, based on the pandemic. IFES was one of those halls that had a great big hall. And, in 1926, there was, people would wait 4 hours to get in for sopaj. And I think after the parade, they started in 40 minutes and we're done. But, within an hour, everyone that had eaten was done. So it's definitely not the festage of times, I'll say, even like Tisha, I was a queen, in my younger days. And, it used to be something that we'd celebrate all weekend. And I think, last night we had the fish dinner and we were done by 11. And I remember walking out of the hall thinking, gosh, these things used to go to 1:30, 2 a.m. and we'd have to kick people out of the hall. So, we had, I'd say close, somewhere between 250 to 300 people last night. So it was a pretty good showing, I think. I think for me, looking around the room, it's people in their late 50s, early 60s. I'm 45. And so I wonder, there was probably 20 to 25, 30 people in their 40s there. And so I wonder, what's going to happen when these older folks leave the hall, and how will we continue to carry that on?
Indeed. And we'll talk a little bit about that and some of your ideas about that. But indeed, it is. I was just at an event at a Portuguese organization as well a few weeks ago, and everybody was my age or older. There were very few people in their 40s and not enough in their 30s, et cetera. Tisha, the Selma Hall, of course, the pandemic hit everybody, hit the Selma Hall hard as it hit everyone else. But the Festa has come back, and I was there this last Festa with a team from Fresno State. And so, how did you see the comeback? And I think you mentioned to me that you thought there were quite a few less people than in years past. But how has the Festa itself? How did it come back, and what are your thoughts on it? And was it just that you think it happened only this year there was less, or is it a trend that you had seen before the pandemic?
Again, yeah, thank you. It was nice to have the camera crew and everyone there. It brought an extra element. We also had Mr. Jim Costa come to our Festa this year, so we felt very privileged. The attendance, yeah, maybe not what we've seen as far as a high, but I think there has been a trend, downward trend even before COVID. We used to do 3 feedings. The feeding you came to has always been the bigger one, close to about the same or maybe very similar. And then the earlier feeding was maybe a quarter of that or half, and then the nighttime feeding would be about the smallest event. So some of the changes we've made doing for the pandemic, we do the 1 feeding, we give away the sodas and different things like that. The drinks, we don't charge for those anymore. And we've actually found that the people are more generous when you don't put a price on them. And so I've run the outside bar for probably close to 10 years. And last year was the highest year we've ever made as far as a profit on that outside bar. And we didn't set prices, so people just brought it. And then this year was more than average as well. A little less than last year, but a little more. It's the food that I think really attracts the people. We don't have a big Portuguese community to know much about Espírito Santo and Santa Isabel and all of that. They come for the food because the sopage is really good. We say we have the best in the valley. Some may disagree, but we say in Selma we have the best sopage in the valley. So, and we're on Trinity Sunday, which falls anywhere from Memorial Day to Father's Day. So we run into similar issues when it's Memorial Day weekend. We actually get more people Memorial Day weekend than when it's Father's Day weekend. I actually would have thought in my head the reverse. So that sometimes works against us. Our cook actually retired this year. You met him when you were doing the series, my cousin. But we have a younger generation coming in, and he's agreed to help. Mark has agreed to help them continue on, so that's great. So the flavor and the recipe that is my great uncle Frank Cardozo's recipe will still continue on. So we're excited for that. It is tough, as Christina was talking. I'm 43. I'll be 44 at the end of the month. But it is tough to get a younger generation. I'm there because Grandma made me go to the meetings as a kid. She took me to all the Portuguese fraternal organizations. Everybody else had, free nights. I knew the 3rd Tuesday I was at the hall for IDS. The 1st Monday I'm there for SPAA. Like, that was my schedule. It was Portuguese fraternal organizations and the hall, of course. So it just became a routine. And I think that's what we lose with the younger generation, is making it part of the routine. And in some of the panels that you've had, Denise, I've been listening in, they've talked about, getting the younger generation more involved outside of just doing cleanup and dumping the trash and making them work. You have to take their suggestions and you have to try them. And if they don't work, that's okay. You tried it. Not everything works. But, it's getting out of that mindset of, well, we've done it this way forever. We have to continue doing it. And the pandemic kind of forced us to think outside the box. So I think there was actually why I missed a lot of events and a lot of things, and family-wise, personally-wise, fraternal-wise. I think it forced us to think outside the box and actually benefit us in the future.
Indeed, indeed. That's what we would wanted to discuss in the next few questions as well. And I do have to agree that the cabbage is the best I've ever had in a Portuguese supper. So I do have to say that the cabbage is awesome. And I kind of know the secret now. I won't tell anybody, but Mark told me a little bit the secret why the cabbage is the way it is, because it was just awesome. Elaine, I know I don't know if the San Pablo Hall had the festa this year, and so but you mentioned a couple events, the open house and this one. And did the San Pablo have their traditional festa this year, or opted for not to have, because a few halls did not?
No, we were able to do the festa,
Okay, good.
and it was right now, we're in a different circumstance that our hall is part of City Hall, the San Pablo City Hall. We were at the old location. City Hall moved, so they had to take us with them. We have our new hall, and there's still a Maple Hall. So we did do a festa. It was on the second, it's always on the second Sunday of June. And yes, our turnout was not as big as it has been in the past. There's no doubt about it. But because for us, because everything was so new, it was a new hall, new entryway, new the way people leave, how we bring sopas in, everything was new. It actually worked, I think, in our benefit that we had a really nice practice run for all of this. And to enhance, we had vendors come and sell. It was via one of our directors, Michael. We had vendors there with things that they make. Some were soaps, some were candles, some were kind of like homemade products. And it gave something for people to do, because we were in a new location. At the old hall, there's a fountain in the middle of a huge square. And so people would congregate there, and you could have the music playing, people could dance, whatever. This time it had to be a little bit different. The layout is so much different at the new City Hall. And I just want to comment about someone saying the younger people. We are extremely fortunate that we have a bulk of our directors are under 45, and many of them in their 30s. And so why they took an interest, yes, a lot of it is because their grandmothers did, their mothers did, their fathers were a part. But I think a lot of it is that when you're raised in a Portuguese home, you have saudades for the Portuguese things. And so it's a way to share experiences. Sure, you're going to have, it's not always Superbock or Sag's beer. It might be one of the local microbreweries that are so popular amongst, a triple IPA instead of a dark bock. But they have come up with very good ideas. They take initiative. It's too bad that they're not on this panel, because they would be the ones who could express better than I do. They're enthusiastic about putting things on Facebook, posting pictures. Social media is a big deal amongst young people. They tell us what's going on in the community based on what they've picked up on social media. And we are in a good place. I have no, we had our president will be finishing his year, and let's see, DJ's probably in his 30s. Michael comes in as president. this next year. He's in his 30s, but they take it very seriously too. They understand what traditions are. I think the older generation needs to not just teach a tradition, but to explain the tradition. You can't say, well, this is the way we do it. No, if they know the history behind it and can empathize with what's gone on in the past, they can respect tradition, yet make it their own.
Indeed, and Elaine, we're going to come back to you in a little bit because it's your situation, as you explained, as being part of the city, is quite unique. It's not, so it's that was a decision made, a few years ago, and I'd like to, in a little bit after we go to Tish and Christina, to explain that a little, because every hall is unique indeed, but your situation is something that we discussed actually with one of the millennial panels, which is people said, listen, I just don't have time to go and serve at a bar twice a week, so this hall is open 3 days a week, and I just don't have the time to go do this. And so we talked about and then people were saying, how much insurance costs and this cost and that cost. And of course, the San Pablo Association made a wise decision quite a few years ago to turn it around and not to have to worry about all these things that other halls spend sometimes 70 and 80% of their time, so they can actually think about something else. But Tisha, we'll start with you this time. The Selma Hall, of course, the topic, of course, the role of the Portuguese Hall in the 21st century, and we are in 2022. We're 22 years into the 21st century, and it seems like a lot of the halls, other than are kind of operating in some way, shape, or form the way they were operating, 25 or 30 years ago. How do you see the Selma Hall? And as you said, all of these halls, all three of you are unique situations because, as Tisha mentioned, Selma is not a community that has a very strong Portuguese American community. It's not like, Selma, if it has 25,000 people, it's not like 5,000 of them are Portuguese or 2,000 of even are Portuguese. So it is a community that, throughout the years, people moved, and I actually got the opportunity to talk to a couple of ladies, and they explained to me that, it was a very rural community with with dairies and things like that no longer exist. And so the Portuguese American community is not there as much as it was maybe, 70 years ago. So how does a hall like Selma with a small Portuguese community survive? How does the hall like Selma, what do you do? Because you can't obviously just have one festa per year or two, and in order to pay the bills and to continue with it. And you don't have the community, because we talked just in a prior panel about the possibility of having like the Portuguese halls turn into real community centers. In other words, as some community centers are, Jewish American community centers, Irish American community centers, where there's, daycare, and then where there's this and where there's that, there's an array of events, because the community, is changing, and the community wants these services now. And so that's not the case in Selma. I don't know if you offered things for the Portuguese American community that they would go there, because there's not a community there. The community in Fresno next door to you has a hall. The community in Lemoore has a hall. The community in Hanford has a hall. And that's my other question. So how do you survive, with what do you do to survive economically, first of all? And second of all, thinking maybe, let's not put it in today's terms, but thinking maybe 10, and you're young, but, thinking maybe 20 years from now or 30, do you see a possibility of these halls, even though they're a little bit distant because of the rural part of the valley, but do you see some kind of a fusion, such as there has been with Luso, SPRSI, with some of the others? Is that a possibility? So that's a two-part question. Basically, the first part, what do you do to survive, because you don't have the strong Portuguese American community? And second of all, economically, and then second of all, do you see any fusion of these halls, even in the valley, even with the ruralness of it?
Yeah. So economically, we rely heavily on the rental aspect of our hall. We are very fortunate that we keep our costs lower than the competition in the hall, in Selma, as far as a hall venue would go. Pretty much our biggest competition is 3-4 blocks away at the St. Joseph's Catholic Church when they built their hall. So we kind of gauge their prices. We come in a little bit under. And so far we've been able to keep.
Boy, you cut the prices of the Catholic Church. I mean, that's going to be down in history,
You got to do what you got to do. So we watch those things. They're the only venue in town big enough. I should say big enough, the same size roughly as such. I think they're actually a little bigger. But we have things like we have the bar service that they don't have. They don't allow alcohol at the moment at the Catholic Church. So it's kind of popular for, our biggest renters are quinceañeras and weddings. Or this year, or actually this month and next month, there's a lot of anniversaries and like 80th birthday parties and 90th birthday parties. I think we've been doing very well when things opened up from COVID. We've been very busy. Most weekends are booked, which is a good thing. From the perspective of economics and finances. But I'm kind of leery to think, that, well, everything's great now, we don't got to worry about it, because I think we're still in a catch-up mode. We're celebrating a Sweet 16 because we couldn't have the quinceañera because of COVID. So people are out there trying to do catch-up. We're on a regular year pre-COVID, 2-3 events a month, and we were like, okay, we're gonna survive. COVID put us into debt for the first time in years. We have a loan, and so we're working on paying that off as well. So we rely on besides the rentals, and realistically, because we keep our prices low, we really make our money on the bar and other items like that. But we do have some fundraisers. We have a yearly spaghetti dinner that Constance Brazil heads up and cooks. And one of the things that I think is a little bit nicer that happened with COVID and the pandemic is, instead of being a sit down, in person, whatever, it became a drive-through. And it's continued to be successful as a come pick up a meal for a family of 4 and go. So while it's a lot of work, now it's less work and maybe even a little more profitable because you're not having all that excess supplies and things like that. So that's pretty much our major fundraiser. And then, of course, we're lucky enough to have Maria Fernandez Simoins on our board. And she does sweetbread fundraisers with us. So we usually try to do 1 or 2 of those a year. And then we're constantly thinking of new things, but we have those stable. We have the spaghetti dinner. We have the sweetbread. We do karaoke nights, which brings in the community. We offer the karaoke for free, so we make our money off the bar, snack bar type thing. But we get rentals that way because that hall has been there since, I think, 1907. Not that version of the hall. That hall was built in 82 or 83, I believe, because there was a fire. But it's been there for years. And there's people that come to an event and they're like, I lived in Selma my entire life, never knew it was here, because we're kind of on the outskirts. You've been there. You're kind of in the more rural area. And we are maybe not so much. The farming community is moving away and selling off to subdivisions here and there, but we're still very much a farming community. We are raisin capital of the world still. Self-proclaimed. I'm not sure there's any stats to substantiate that anymore, but and we do have dairies, but a lot of the dairies have sold off and have turned into almond orchards and other things. So the community is changing around us, but that's what we rely on.
So you're basically the rentals are not to the Portuguese community, they're more to the Hispanic community and other ethnicities as well.
Yes, if we had to rely strictly on the Portuguese community, it would not be here today. We rely heavily on the community of Selma. I don't believe there's any Portuguese businesses owned in Selma at the moment. We used to have a few, but a lot of them have sold and retired. So we rely on a lot of our donations for the things that we auction off at our festa comes from, the Chinese restaurant, Cho's, and comes from Sal's Mexican restaurant and our insurance agency, so we rely on the people we do business with to help us back and the community as a whole. So how we bring them in is really, like I said, the food. They have no clue why we have a parade, most likely, or why we have this girl dressed up with a crown and a fancy dress and a cape. but they will come for the food. Like you said, we all like food. So it goes outside the Portuguese culture. Everybody likes food. And Portuguese people obviously have really good food. So that's how we entice them in, is with the food. And then that's how we get the rentals and the other items. Sorry, there's a truck going by. I am in my car. We do. We rely on the rentals from the community, which is mostly a Hispanic community in Selma. In fact, our board is made up of 11 people. It's 10 women, actually, 5 of them being past grand presidents of SPRSI at the moment. But I think besides Erica and myself, nobody else actually lives in Selma. Our board is populated by Fowler, Hanford, Riverdale, and Layton, which has always been the case. Most of our queens are not from Selma. They come from those same areas where they do have a bigger Portuguese community. And we've benefited from being close by and not having, I guess, such a demand for those things like to be queen. So when someone doesn't get in Riverdale, you know, here's Selma, they have a slot, go over there. So we've benefited from being in the area and not being so big, to where we provide opportunities for people that do want those types of items, or those opportunities, not items, but the opportunities for their daughter, granddaughter to be queen. But yeah, that's how we survive economically at this moment, is with our rentals and our fundraisers. And then for our future, I do think there's a future for the hall. We've recently started in these last few years, even before COVID, and even more so through COVID, partnering with other organizations like the Lions Club. They do a Chili Verde dinner. We buy tickets there. We do the spaghetti dinner. They buy tickets from us. We do joint kind of fundraiser events like the karaoke thing. So they get their publicity and they get their, they have a little checklist of everything they need to complete every year. So kind of partnering, we now partner with Rotary. Rotary now meets at the Portuguese Hall since right before COVID. So it's branching out to the other organizations in the city and seeing how we can work together, because they're also small in nature, but together we're big. And we pull our resources and our people to come to a dinner, and they pull their people to come to a dinner, and we're both successful at the end of the day. And I think that's what it's going to take, is building more of those partnerships in order to get past and to make sure there is a Selma Portuguese Hall in the next 10 to 15 years, besides all of the other, stuff in the background, like personalities and other things you have to fight with and make sure people don't run off and keep their attention and do things.
Before I turn to Christina and Elaine, just another quick question, Tisha. With all those partnerships with the Rotary, with the Lions, with all the different clubs, with the Hispanic community using and everything else, do you see in the near future what is happening actually at some halls, I've been told, in the northern part of the valley, where other ethnicities are part of the board? And do you think that's something that Selma is open to? Like, a Mexican American that wants to be involved in the Portuguese community and be part of the hall, or any other folks of any ethnicity. How is that? How do you think that is looked? I know you have no problem with that, but how do you think that is looked with the board? Obviously,
I think they're very very open. And when you asked the question, I was trying to think on our board. I believe on our current board, three are not Portuguese at all.
Okay.
They're married to Portuguese,
mm-hmm.
and that's how they got involved. But themselves are not. So, but again, they got married, and
Sure.
however they got involved and stayed involved. We have had some Hispanic board members, and I don't know about any other ethnicity off the top of my head, but I think they've always been open.
Sure.
I mean, I don't think they'll ever allow it to be like, 51% controlled by non-Portuguese directors, so to speak, but definitely to bring them in for their ideas and obviously labor. Being a director is not like this cush job and you get to sit back and watch everything else. You're in there doing everything. And so that's where we lack the physical labor at times for the dinners and the festa, running to get supplies, running the hall, all those kind of things. So I think we do. And actually a few years ago, we were approached, we decided not to enter into the partnership, but we were approached by a wedding planner who was looking for a venue that she could pitch to clients. And we happened to have an indoor venue. She had outdoor venues at the time, but she was looking for something indoor so that way she could have more summer weddings, more winter weddings when people don't want to be outside in the valley in 100 and something degrees and whatnot. So why we didn't take on that venue or that venture in the past, I think if something was like that to rise again, we definitely have to be more open into those kind of partnerships just to make sure the hall stays and we're able to at least do our festa going forward.
Sure. Christina, your situation with IFES. So tell us a little bit about that. How does it maintain financially stable? You know, of course, it has such a long history in the Bay Area, but things are changing. You know, I bet if the hall was sold, it would be in the millions and millions and millions because property is prime in the Bay Area, changing a little bit here in the Valley, but not as much. So what is the nature of it? Obviously, the festa is important. A few other fundraisers you mentioned, the dinner that you just recently had. But what does the hall do to maintain its financial stability? First of all, second of all, tell us a little bit about the composition and is it open also to other ethnic groups? And how does that has been involved? And how do you see the hall in 15, 20 years from now?
Yeah. Currently, the hall does have a loan. And so we're lucky in that regard. It is a large property. And so there's a home on the hall property that's rented out to a family. And then there's a second building that is rented full time to another organization. And then the third building is for use consistently for the board of directors and more the Portuguese community. There's a fourth little chapel that I believe only gets used. I've only seen it used for festas, but we're lucky in that regard that we have continuous income. But I don't even think with the rental income, those two, it's enough to keep the hall running, right? We do these fundraisers to help pay for the festa. And it's something I've actually been thinking deeply about is, you know, the festas and the history of it. I know Tisha mentioned as well, you know, how the history started in villages, right? There's a kroa and then a family takes it. And I've often wondered, how did we get to this evolution of buying these capes and crowns and these dresses? Like, how did that evolve to this? And I wonder if we might have to go back to the original way, because that is a big expense for our hall. We spend probably upwards of $10,000 when a new queen comes in. So that's something I myself have recently been thinking about. And then you also asked, I love that idea of making it into a real community center, and was talking to my cousin last night and how do we get people involved? And, you know, we talked about there's got to be something we can do with Napa and wine, or, you know, an idea in that regard. Another cousin mentioned, well, the World Cup's coming up. Can't we do an event there? And so I think that will be the real struggle, is trying to find these ideas that, what's the word for this area, especially it's, we have this time problem, right? Everyone's just stretched so thin with time commitments. And then when you do sign up, you then got to set up the hall and clean the hall. And you know, I think in this area, our generation is getting out of that kind of manual labor, right? We pay for people to come cut our lawn or whatever. And we don't want to spend our free time, which is already at a premium, going to the hall and sweeping and cleaning up after a festa. So I think that's also a struggle, right? We want to be on these boards, but it does end up turning into a lot of manual labor, unfortunately. So kind of finding that happy medium. How do we continue with things that will bring our community together and keep our culture alive? And then going back to the board of directors and being Portuguese, I believe the Mountain View Hall has bylaws that restricts board of directors to some sort of Portuguese heritage to be on the board, or you have to be married into a Portuguese family. So it's something that's come up in one of our recent meetings. You know, there's kind of things in the bylaws that we've sort of stretched and modified, and now the question has come up, well, should we change some of our bylaws? So those are also questions that we're struggling with, and trying to find answers to the correct path forward.
And is it tough for you, Christina, being, young in early 40s to deal with maybe someone who's my age, 63 or even older? Is there sometimes a generational conflict? Because I know that one of our issues in some of the halls that I know is that generational conflict. Young people want to change some things. But Tisha mentioned, hey, May, and also Elaine, maybe it doesn't work, but let's try it anyway. But sometimes there is the bylaws being one of them. I know that people are stuck on bylaws, and of course, and they are important as they run an organization, but they also need to be changed, like a constitution's change. Do you find that there's a little bit of a generational conflict? First of all, that's number one. And number two, what about something that I'll ask everyone else also later, which is the professionalization of the hall? We've talked a little bit about that in another panel. In other words, okay, these things, as you said, many people, we had a few people on our millennial panel that said that, listen, I could help, but I just don't have the time, and exactly what you said, time constraints. And so is there a possibility of doing something like the professionalization, where then someone can belong to the board, but knowing that he or she doesn't have to go sweep the board? That there's nothing wrong with sweeping. Obviously, we all would do it when what we have to do, but it's not the labor itself; it's the time to do that labor. So, is that something that your generation's kind of looking at? So, a little bit generational ideas, and also the idea of professionalizing more and more services.
Yeah, I mean, it really hasn't come up on our board. I think, there's last night, it was my brother working the bar, and he's not even part of the board of directors, and a good friend of mine who's not Portuguese. And we were just kind of scrambling last minute. And, we were lucky, I guess, because we gave away free wine, during the dinner. The bar cocktails, drinks weren't at a premium. So the bar wasn't terribly busy, but it is something, I have been asked on my weekends to come work the bar. And I said, I don't have anything left in me. I'm sorry, I can't go work the quinceañera bar. And I said, what if that was something that I suggested. What if we paid bartenders to just go do that? And, unfortunately, it does cut into the profits of the rental. We also rent a lot to quinceañeras. I think it's our largest kind of target group for rentals. But, I think, like most people on this call, come the end of the week, we're pretty tired Friday night. And then
Sure.
And so
Sure.
that's been my struggle. I feel like I haven't been the greatest director, because often they call and it's manual labor, and I tell my mom, "No boss, I don't have anything."
Non posso. That's the best way.
And so my mom says,
Já não há forças,
I
não é?
did.
Yes.
Oh, okay. You've been listening on my conversations. But, she assures me that it's okay. The older people, they're retired, they can go. But, there is a little bit of guilt there that I don't do, my part. And even, selling tickets for the fish dinner, it was a little bit of twisting my friends and guilts and cousins' arms to get them there. And then, you're working the event, and then you also want to make sure they're okay. So yeah, there's a struggle, and I'd be curious to almost have a little research group and what has been working. I mean, I think it sounds like, based on different communities, Elaine, I'd be curious, how do we get the 30-year-olds involved in Mountain View? Although I'm from Santa Clara, so it's very similar. I don't think any of the board of directors actually live in Santa Clara.
Yeah, it's changing. The community is changing, and it's going to change even more, the demographics. But Elaine, so let's talk a little bit about the uniqueness of San Pablo, and how you don't have. I mean, you have fundraisers for, of course, but you don't have the some of the bills that these people have because of what happened. So tell us a little bit about the history, if you don't mind, and how it has impacted the Holy Ghost Association and what you do with it, please.
So with the San Pablo Holy Ghost Association, there was a quite large hall right very close to where I live in San Pablo. And in the day, when I was a young child, they would feed about 2,000 people, and the hall would hold a tremendous amount of people. There was no membership. It was only run by a board of directors and volunteer works from the community, the Portuguese community. And it actually got to a point where, because they were only doing the festa, funds began to dwindle down. The city of San Pablo didn't have an actual city hall. They were using an old elementary school years ago, and they wanted the property. And so they came to an agreement with the directors of the San Pablo Holy Ghost Association at the time to purchase the land so that they could build their city hall. The condition was that the Holy Ghost Association would have a meeting room, which at the old city hall was located on the second floor. And they have the rights to use the main hall 16 days a year. They received an amount of money at that time, also which they used to put in the kitchen, appliances, refrigerators, stoves, etc., chairs, tables, and they had some money left over. San Pablo they were only getting together. It was a very older group. My father was a director for a while, and they would just get together and meet once a month. That was it. There really wasn't, they didn't do a festa. They didn't really do anything except for meet once a month. Later on, a president who came in, who was a supervisor in San Pablo, family was from Fayal, and Mr. Diaz, and he wanted it to be opened up to membership. He went ahead and did that, letters were sent out. I don't think email was even used that much, and a membership was started. A few years after that, in fact, the first gathering was the Italians who were cooking for the so-called festa that we had. Now, when the city decided that they no longer were going to use that as City Hall, it was really not set up for ADA compliances, and we're building anew. The old directors were smart enough to say that, okay, if you move, you got to take us with you. And that's what ended up happening. So we had meetings prior to go over what the new terms would be. In perpetuity is no longer used, but we have rights to stay in this new facility as long as we don't abandon the facility. But with that, which a lot of people say, oh, you don't have total control. Yes, we have total control of our hall. We don't have total control of the main hall. But we don't pay a water bill, an electric bill, a garbage bill, or property taxes. Our expenses are pretty much limited to our insurance, our health licenses, which are required, and to purchase what we need for our hall. In terms, the city doesn't really, they're not thrilled that we're there, and we always have to be on top of what was discussed and what we had agreed to. Eduardo Zebio, who's our secretary, he keeps great minutes, has personal contact with the assistant city manager. And any issue, it's not a letter that's written. No, he calls them on the phone and things are discussed. Sure, we might be a little bit of a pain in the city's eyes because no other organization in San Pablo, and there are numerous of other ethnicities and cultures, don't have what we have. And but it allows for the organizations that are in our area that are Portuguese, like the Luso American Fraternal Federation. Council 5 has been a part of San Pablo for years, eons. Well, sure, they get to use our hall whenever they want. Part of their members, I'm a member, part of our board is made up of also members of the Luso American Education and the Fraternal Federation of Council 5. So we get together, we do our fundraising, it's just basically for the festa. Our expenses are not that great outside of the festa. So we don't have to be there more than maybe once a month, which in the other aspect allows the young people to know that if they're going to be president, they're not going to be at the hall every week. And the once a month events will take place as soon as our festa is over. Yes, the president has to go and participate in other parades, other festas, but we're off. We're on vacation too. Everybody goes to Portugal. So it's not that, and people like myself, sure, I don't want to be at a hall every week. I washed floors the other night, but one of the younger ones, the incoming president, was washing the floors at the end of the event. They know that the commitment is not so overwhelming and so time consuming that doesn't allow them, especially young people, to do what they do with their spare time, which is different than what I do with mine. And our presidents, unfortunately, in some of the organizations, they've had the same president for as long as I can remember. We request everyone who has been president does it for a 2-year term. And at the end of the vice president knows, okay, in 2 years, you're going to come in. You're not stuck in the position forever. That's a big factor, I think. Yeah, we're a small group. There's no doubt. Compared to other organizations, we are incredibly small, but we have heart. There is no doubt about it. We have a lot of heart and everyone pulls their weight. But again, if it was something, a gathering, we don't rent the hall. It is never rented, so we're not obligated to spend any more time than it's for the benefit of the organization. And that allows the young people, like I said, they don't mind taking it for a couple of years. They know, okay, I have this job for 2 years. And then the next person comes in. I won't have to do this until I'm a grandfather. I heard someone talk about expenses of capes, etc. Believe it or not, San Pablo's capes have all been donated to us for our festa. And we started off with one that we borrowed years ago. And many people who participated in other organizations or were a part of the committee and their daughters, granddaughters, etc., were queens, and new capes were made for the individuals. And they would then fold them up nicely and tuck them under their beds. So people who came to San Pablo would say, well, gee, I have a beautiful cape. Would you like it? All our capes have been donated. We haven't made a single cape. And it's to the point now, we probably have oh, I don't know, 8 different capes. So the incoming queen gets to choose which cape she would like to use. We give money to the queens to buy their dress, expenses of the maids, etc. But yeah, we repurpose so many things. So that spending $10,000 on a cape, no, we never have, and I seriously doubt we ever will. In terms of how we get word out, word of mouth is the best thing. Like I said on our last event on Friday, it was a small group, but we have no doubts that the next one will be bigger because those people had a great time and they're going to tell their friends. And Eduardo is excellent. He sends flyers via email. We have a huge email list for the membership. For those who don't have it, they get a paper flyer. But emails are sent out publicizing an event 3-4 times before the event takes place, and one the week of, and it's posted on social media. So it creates an interest, and then people start saying, oh, you know, are you going? And that has been incredibly helpful to us.
Thank you, Elaine. Thank you. Some great points. And so that you can see their situation is different, 16 times a year, the festa, of course. And so sometimes that is what attracts, of course, young people. They don't say, you know, if you are the president of this hall, and I know some here in the San Joaquin Valley, you know, Northern California, Bay Area, and Southern California, same, is, I mean, it's like, you know, you got to be at the hall if you're the president. I just talked to a young man that couldn't be here today. He's in his mid 40s as well. And he just told me, you know, as we were talking a little bit about a week and a half ago, he told me, I spend 3 days a week at the hall. As president, I spend 3, sometimes 4 days a week at the hall. And that is just, you know, the time commitment. Like he said, I'm doing it. I made a commitment for 2 years, but then I won't ever do it again. I don't even want to be on the board. And so it happens a lot in some of these communities where folks are committed. I mean, the hall it has so many events, you know, every weekend. And because of the lack of professionalization that we talked, and because people want to make a profit. So, you know, who's going to serve in a bar? As Christina said, she pulled in her brother, she pulled in a friend and a friend and a friend. And so it's usually the directors, and some of these directors serve, you know, there's 11 or 15 directors in the board. Some of these directors, if the hall is rented every single Friday and Saturday, like a lot of them are, in order to turn a profit and to be sustainable, then obviously some of the directors are serving once a week, or some of the directors, and then the president is usually the key person that has to be at everything, and he or she, here mostly he, will of course have to be at the hall, you know, 2-3 times a week, and that's just a time constraint that more and more young people, even in the valley, you know, it's just because we are a rural area doesn't mean people don't have professions. Of course, that, you know, takes much of their time. No longer anybody works 8 hours. It seems like we're all working 9, 10, 11 hours, and with the phone, we're always working. So we have about 15 minutes left. I want to thank each and every one of you, but I want to get one last comment from each of you, if you can do so in about 3 or 4 minutes or so each. Do you see the possibility of some of these? And I think I asked in a roundabout way. Do you see the possibility of some of these halls, instead of disappearing? And we'd hate to see halls disappear. There are some that right now are considering that, if I'm told, in certain parts of California. Do you see maybe some halls, maybe some halls coming together, or thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, Christina, but I'm thinking, that Mountain View is not that far from Santa Clara. So, maybe and I'm not saying that's going to happen next year or in 5 years, but who knows, 12, 15, 20 years from now, whether, will they have to come together? One of them sells the property because that's just millions of dollars. And then the other one uses it to update it and change things and become just one hall. And even here in the Valley, I mean, as to, even though, some of the halls are just being used once or twice a year, and how economically sustainable is that going to be, for the younger generation? I mean, years ago they did that because the dairies were lots of them, and the owners didn't mind giving a cow that was worth $1,500 or $2,000, and all of a sudden you have 30 cows, and there you go, boom, $60,000. That pays a lot of expenses, but those are less. And the younger generation, I have this wonderful story of this man who one time told me, in the group of people I brought from Portugal, went to go see his dairy. He's very well known in the Central Valley, and he's very, very generous. He's elderly and he's still alive, and his health is frail, but he's a wonderful man. And he told, I said, Mr. I'm not going to identify, but Mr. XYZ, will you tell these folks from Portugal, how many cows you give to the festa? And that year he had given 32 to 32 festas, 32 cows. And people in Portugal were amazed. I mean, there are people in Portugal that don't own 32 cows. And of course, he had quite a few thousand, but he gave 32. And then he said, but that's not going to last for long. And they said, why? Because my son is already after me. And my son said it, and enough, that's exactly what happened. When his son took over the dairy, all of a sudden they may give 3 or 4 cows, to 3 or 4 festas, but the other 27 are no longer given because a different mentality, a different business mentality, in a different world. So, Christina, we'll start with you if you don't mind. Do you see this 2-part question? Do you see the possibility of these halls coming together in the future? And it may be mid and long term. In order to survive, these organizations such as, the PFSA and LUSO and SPRSI, the fraternals have done that. And who knows if they'll do it again, what's going to happen, 20, 30 years from now. Do you see that as a possibility? And second of all, how big is technology? Lane just mentioned that, the emails and of course social media, but how big do you see technology playing a role in connecting with people around the hall?
Yeah. So Mountain View is unique in that I think it's one of the only cities in California that has 2 halls in its city. And if I remember
Oh,
correctly,
wow. Two Portuguese halls.
yeah, and they're very
Wow.
close.
Wow. Okay. That's
Yeah,
even interesting. Yeah, that's unique.
there's the Mountain View on Villa and the Mountain View on Sterling Road, which is the one that I'm affiliated with. And I think Santa Clara may have even been like that at some point, because there's the SES Corp, and then I think the SES, they call it insurance. And so, yeah, maybe we came apart and now it's time to come back together, right? It's not a conversation that I've heard, but it sounds like it's a very real possibility. And especially as I sat there at the dinner last night, I remember thinking, oh, I wonder, we should probably do a better job of representing each other. Why don't we invite more people from the different, you would think we'd have a better connection, or network set up that just was easier to contact people and find out about everything going on. And I know there's a few social Facebook pages about that, but yeah, it does seem like we're a little separate. I was involved with LUSO when I was a child, and that seemed like a totally separate organization. And Denise, I think, maybe there's something that needs to be done in the future to bring more of these organizations together, to not run so separate, right?
I agree. I think that we need to talk more amongst each other, whether it be panels like this or even in person, and do that, because who knows what's going to happen. Christina, thank you so much for your thoughts. Thank you so much for participating. Tisha, what do you think? I know that distances are different than they are. And I didn't even know there were two halls. That's wonderful. In Mountain View, such I mean, it's a big community, but by the same token, everything is so compact, compared to the valley. I know that here, you have, Selma's, quite a few minutes from Riverdale and Layton and all these other places. But in some instances, I have heard that maybe there might be a fusion of somehow, or even like some organizations with the Hanford Hall, or some that are independent, come together. Do you think that there's room in the future for some kind of a fusion, or do you think there's some room, or because of the geography of the valley, and they're usually 25, 30, 40 miles away, or do you think because of the geography of the valley, what might make better sense is partnership with organizations that are not Portuguese, or wedding venues, or wedding consultants, etc.?
Yeah, I had mentioned last year when you had the similar panel around the halls, that for us in Selma, we have our Festus Trinity Sunday, so is Lemoore. And maybe it's not a way, we may never combine the halls, but maybe because of manpower or interest, it becomes an alternation. Every even year you go to Selma, every odd year you go to Lemoore. I definitely see some kind of partnership like that probably in the future to keep the festa going. It's hard for us to find queens these days. So we've talked about if you have them do a 2-year commitment, which other organizations have had, then you still go, but you take all the manpower and they just move from one hall to the next depending on how it goes. I think for Selma, I think if we were to ever have some kind of merger or need some kind of financial help or something, kind of like in the way of San Pablo, I think it would come from a different organization. I know Lions clubs have halls in different places. Knights of Columbus have halls in different places. And these are all groups that meet at our hall now. So I could see that in the future, they may say, hey, we've saved up X amount of money. Can we buy into the hall? And this is what we want for it. And then it gets another logo besides being Selma Portuguese Hall. Maybe the Lions logo is out front, or the Rotary logo is out front, something that's there for whatever they do. I know Lions Club has conferences and stuff like that. It's quite a bit like the Portuguese clubs, actually, if you're not a member. It's surprisingly how much similar they are as far as their goals and the way they do things and what they want to do. So I would see in the future that if we were to have anything like a merger type situation, it would most likely 99% be with some organization outside of the Portuguese clubs. But I do think for the festas that instead of competing, as they say, and I remember we've talked about changing our date, and my Uncle Louis was one of the ones that was like, no, we've had our date first. They changed their date. So we have held fast to that Trinity Sunday, but it might be to our benefit, or to have that conversation with Lemoore one day, instead of closing up shop or having to discontinue, and say, hey, is there a way we can both benefit each other? As for the technology, I think COVID forced us to look more at technology. Obviously, I've seen you for many years, Denise, do these conferences with the Education Foundation in person and getting your room set up, usually at Tulare High School, and running around. I think it's great that we have Zoom and Facebook Live. And as you've mentioned in many of your panels just this year, you have people from Brazil and Hawaii and Portugal and all over the place. So it opens up a broader venue. So when you're talking about a physical building, that doesn't necessarily help, but bringing your building up to newer technology standards, like having Wi-Fi, which we do have at the Selma Hall, for the last few years, but having the capabilities of like streaming or the projectors or things like that, so that when people do have weddings, you're more marketable and say, hey, you can't have all your family here with you today, but we already have cameras and video, and we can stream for you, and we can do all these different things that'll make us more enticing than, the Catholic Church, or maybe even a hall a little further away. And they might consider, what, I'm going to go to Selma because they have all these cool technology things that my family in Mexico or Portugal or wherever can watch me get married, and I don't have those options anywhere else. We've done quite a bit in Facebook over the last few years, which I think is good, getting us out there, posting pictures of how they decorate the event. Because when you walk in the hall, it's kind of bland, for lack of better words. It did get a remodel during COVID because of a fire sprinkler break. So it wasn't necessarily planned, but it worked out that there was no rental. So the fact that it had to happen, you know, thank God it happened when it did. It didn't impact us so much. But, you know, sometimes not everybody, myself included, I don't have a great eye to see what can be done here. But like I was bartending for a wedding last night, and they did these drape things and had all these things. And people kept coming up and saying, oh, the hall did great. And it's like, oh, no, this is not what the hall looks like on a day-to-day basis. This is what these lovely people have done. But putting those pictures out there gives people the idea like, oh, I didn't think of that when I walked in, but I could do these same things. Listening to one of your panels, I don't remember if it was yesterday or Friday, with and I'm not up to all those generation whatever, but it was
I don't blame you. They run into each other for me right now. Nah, yeah.
yeah. So they were talking about TikTok and Instagram, and I
Mhm,
thought, you know what? Yes, we need to get in those venues, because I often follow TikTok and Instagram, and I see all these different venues. In fact, the place that I got married is recently on TikTok. And I was like, oh, and they take videos and stuff. And I said, there's no reason we can't do it. And it's basically free publicity to market to a younger generation. And maybe from one of those rentals, someone will ask, because they often think we're part of the city or we're owned by someone. And it's really hard to explain the concept that we're not really owned by anyone, we're ran. And maybe they would take an interest. You know, they find it quite unique when we say, no, we're volunteering to be here. And it's like, so you're doing all this work at the bar and you're giving the money away? It's like, basically, yes. The money goes to the hall, you know, and we try to make our best at it and have fun. But I think I learned a lot from your panels as far as the technology. So I think it is updating the halls to be more conference friendly, technology friendly, as well as publicity and getting out there in the, not just the Facebook market, but the TikTok and the Instagram and whatever venue and platform comes out in the future at some point, because I'm sure there'll be more.
Sure, and that's a great idea to do live streaming of weddings and events like that, because more and more people have relatives in different parts of the world, may not even be in the so-called old world, you know, as far as Portugal, or even in the new world as far as Mexico or everything, but even people within the state, you know, our demographics have changed, and sometimes, you know, you're having a wedding in a Central Valley city and someone lives in San Diego and they just can't come up that weekend or that time, or in another state, to live in a neighboring state. It's a wonderful idea. That's something that I think all the halls that are using it for rentals should explore, that because that is a selling point, especially when you are renting to the Hispanic community, as was said by Christina and Tisha, that both of you rent to the Hispanic community. So if you're renting to the Hispanic community, it's huge for their family in Guadalajara or Mexico City or any other city, or to have access to this event that they themselves cannot come to. It can be a selling point in order to get more rentals, of course, and maybe a way to acquire more funds, and then have more income generated from that event, which means that then we can proceed, you know, to some of the things that we've talked about, which is including, of course, the professionalization, you know, of having, you know, why should Tisha have to serve at the bar every single time, you know, getting, you know, a professional bartender. I mean, one thing is to run the bar, another one thing is to be there. So maybe a director can run the bar, and obviously it may have to be a director, but as far as the actual working of the event, can be a professional bartender, someone who does this for the different venues. So lots of great ideas. Elaine, the last word is yours. And I must say one thing about this panel before we end. Not only it's all three women, but it's all three women with roots one way or another in Piku. And so that's kind of interesting. So, I mean, Christina is all Piku, if I'm correct, right? And Elaine is half Piku and Tish is Piku. And so it's kudos to Piku Island for being the dominant force here it's that force of that volcanic island that brings forth these women with lots of ideas, lots of commitment, lots of power. Elaine, I think that you may have some issue with. Hopefully, we can bring you back on. There you go. So Elaine, last word. As far as I know, that you guys use technology. I follow the San Pablo Hall on Facebook, and I'm always looking at the wonderful things that you do. But one last word for you in the aspect that that maybe your model may be something that other halls want to look at, especially in metropolitan areas.
I know that a few years back, we tried to coordinate with other organizations that are close by El Cerrito. It's not that far away. And we tried to coordinate with them to do a festa together. It was not well received, unfortunately. When there are people from the older generation, and I'm an older generation, but when it goes back to the very old generation, they have such pride that they don't know. We are alone. I mean, it would be like disowning your child if you go in with another organization. Unfortunately, the two organizations that are in our local area have ceased. They haven't, since the pandemic hit, they have not done a festa, they have not done any events, and they're pretty much gone. Had we worked together years ago, maybe we would also help them, they would have helped us, and things would have been much better. I think with the younger generation, there's a greater possibility for merging of organizations, of trying to do something 1 year in one city, 1 year in a close city, that is not possible with, at least in our area. It was not possible years ago, and we tried, and somehow, and I was born here, so, and I was raised to have faith, to believe in the Portuguese, that they are honest, hardworking, etc. But when it comes to different organizations, sometimes they're afraid that all they want is our money. And that's a hard thing for someone like myself that was never taught that. We don't volunteer our time or work in a bar or cook in the kitchen because we're looking to become rich. No. And that mentality, unfortunately, still was in a local city and stopped us from ever doing it together. Hopefully, I think it's still possible. I think it's the only way certain places will survive. They can still maintain pride. They can maintain their individuality, but working together.
That's a wonderful way to end. Working together. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Wonderful way to end it, indeed. And I do believe that the younger generation will not be as territorial, let's put it that way, as some of us in the older generation have been. It's and I think Tisha's idea of that you just echoed also, Elaine, of possibility of having one area does the festa 1 year, the other area does the festa another year. Why not? If there's two festas right next to, very close, or in the same, in this case, there's actually quite a few miles distance. But if one is having the issue, why not do that where we can all kind of share this in a different manner? Thank you all. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Tisha. Thank you for your service to the Portuguese American community. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your ideas. Lots of great ideas in the last 90 minutes. I appreciate it very, very much on behalf of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute at Fresno State, and on behalf of the Luso American Education Foundation, obviously the 46th conference. I thank all three of you for your service and for your time. And let's just keep on moving forward and thinking the way that all three of you think right now, which is, to put to quote again the famous Elaine Almeida, let's work together. So thank you all very much. Take care, and we'll see you around. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. And those of you continuing, we are going to have our next panel, which is going to be on our last panel for today. It's about time, isn't it? For those of you who've been following, it's just about all day. So our next panel is navigating the future perspectives from Generation X. And so I am going to ask the next panelists to come in, and we'll start with the next panelists as well and get them involved here with us as we begin to bring in this panel. We're just right on time, 5:30, 5:31 almost. So it'll be great to bring all of you in. I think that most of them, everybody I think is already here. Thanks to all of you who are following us on social media. Thanks all the nice comments that we have received, including some very interesting comments as well as, how do we get, folks involved? And so it's interesting that we have had some ideas, not just from panelists, but from those in the audience as well. And I'm taking notes of all of this, and hopefully we'll be able to do as we did last year, which is compile a series of action items that we recommend that came out of these discussions, whether we recommend them or not. The important thing is that they came out of these discussions. And so hopefully all of you that are following us on social media, or those of you who are following us here on the webinar, just a few on the webinar, but quite a few hundreds on social media, that you take time to send me, whether you want to do it publicly or like some of you have done through Messenger. Feel free, that's fine. I accept those as well. And thank you for being in touch and being participative members of this conference. That's exactly what we need. So our guests are all here, I believe. We can see two of them, and I saw momentarily Filomena Pimentel Rocha, and Dr. Monique Kelly Valence is also on. We can see the beautiful castle, so that means that she's on there somewhere. And of course, the two gentlemen as well. So welcome to the last of a long journey that began at 10 o'clock this morning with a break of 2 hours and has continued all afternoon long here through a Zoom webinar and, of course, the social media outlet. I'm going to just do a bit of technology here, which is to